Why did no one look at her? Every morning the hallways of Fort rattled alive with boots and clipped voices, a machine of order and discipline. Soldiers in pressed uniforms, trainees with sharp edges of arrogance, officers who carried themselves like iron statues. Yet through it all, Sterling moved unseen. She was 44, older than most who filled these halls, a woman whose hands trembled so badly she sometimes struggled just to carry her coffee. They called her Shaky, not behind her back but to her face. Soldiers had a cruel gift for nicknames. To them she wasn't a veteran, she wasn't even a woman. She was a broken shadow mopping their floors. Spilled again, Shaky. Staff Sergeant Harrison's voice carried like a blade in the tiled corridor. Her hands trembled as the coffee hit the floor. Three soldiers laughed, wolves in uniform feeding on weakness. Maybe you should stick to sippy cups. Laughter echoed, the young, strong, and merciless sharpening themselves against the humiliation of another. Didn't answer. She bent down, paper towels shaking in her hands, methodical, quiet, invisible. But invisibility had been her weapon long before janitor's work became her duty. She placed her back to the wall, eyes instinctively mapping entrances, exits, distances. Muscle memory whispered beneath the tremor, the kind of muscle memory that never died once it was carved into the body by war. She cleaned silently, breathing through the mockery. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant disappearing. "Don't worry," another soldier smirked. "They'll reassign her soon, somewhere with less breakable stuff, maybe the motor pool." "Oil stains don't show spills," added, earning another round of laughter. Stood straightened, for 2 seconds, just two, her hands went completely still. The mask slipped, training pressed through the cracks, then the tremor returned. She whispered, voice calm and low. "Excuse me, I need to finish this section." The young soldiers dismissed her at once. To them she was already gone, forgotten, discarded, irrelevant. But Sterling hadn't vanished. She had only learned that sometimes the deadliest thing in the room is the one nobody notices. That night, Alpha House, the elite range complex, the place where young men turned themselves into killers at distances most would call impossible. Delta Force candidates, Navy SEALs, Marine snipers, all converging under bright lights and cold air. They were training for the outer edges of human skill, 2,200 meters, 2,600 meters, beyond a mile and a half. At those distances, the bullet was no longer just lead and steel. It was math. It was wind, gravity, Earth's rotation. Every shot was a war against physics itself. And dominating them all was Staff Sergeant Harrison, the same man who mocked that morning. His record, 2,420 meters, worn like a crown. "Beyond 3,000, Harrison said to the circle of eager candidates. "Forget it, that's where fantasy begins." They laughed with him, believed him. He was the authority in their world. But she heard from the corridor. She was pushing her squeaking cart down the hall, mopping floors and emptying trash when the muffled cracks of rifles echoed through ballistic glass. She paused, watched. They missed, they cursed, they recalculated. At 2,600 meters, even their best struggled. Eyes narrowed, her mind moving faster than her hands ever could. She whispered corrections to herself. 1 mil left. Elevation up. 2 minutes. Her lips almost curved at Harrison's words, impossible at 3,000 meters. Impossible. Sometimes impossibilities were just truths no one had tested. Hours later, the men argued at the range. "Math breaks down at 2,800, insisted. "Even perfect calculations, wind makes it luck." "Sir," Harrison added to their instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, "physics just don't allow it. 3,000 meters is a fantasy." Mitchell, grayer, slower, but carrying the weight of decades, said nothing. He had seen things these boys had not. He had read after-action reports buried so deep in classification they might as well have been written in fire. Reports of shots that never officially happened. Legends by ink but carved into truth by blood. But wasn't supposed to be listening. She wasn't supposed to exist in their conversation. She pushed her cart forward, cleaning as she always did. And yet, something began to stir in her chest. She had survived by staying invisible, but invisibility came at a cost. 2 years of silence, 2 years of humiliation, 2 years of being the ghost of someone she used to be. Her hands trembled as she emptied a trash bin, but beneath the tremor was a storm. Later that night, she stopped. For reasons she couldn't even explain, Sterling turned her cart toward the range entrance. A guard stepped forward. Restricted area tonight, civilian access limited. Her voice was steady. I'd like observer status. The sergeant frowned. Observer, this isn't a show. These are weapon systems that might disturb you. I'm familiar with this, said. Effective range 1,800 meters, maximum beyond 4,000. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? My husband taught me. Half a truth, enough to pass. Her ID said she had dependent access. The guard let her through. The moment she stepped inside, everything shifted. Elite shooters barely glanced her way, a trembling janitor, a civilian, irrelevant. But Mitchell watched her. How she positioned herself near the wall, always keeping line of sight to exits. How her eyes scanned the room not with curiosity but with assessment. He had seen this before. In men who came back from places you didn't survive without becoming something else. Ma'am, Mitchell called gently. Questions, just ask. She nodded. What's the furthest target on this range? Harrison answered for him, dismissive. 3,200 meters, but no one touches that, not with human hands. And then spoke words that froze the room. I'd like to try. The laughter died instantly. For a long moment, the range was only wind and silence. A janitor with shaking hands, asking to attempt what their best couldn't dream of. Ma'am, Harrison scoffed, I think you misunderstand. These rifles weigh 30 pounds. Recoil will throw you. You'd need specialized protection. I understand. Stepped in, condescending. Even if you could hold it, the math takes years to master. I understand physics, interrupted softly. Bullet drop, wind deflection, atmospheric drag, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, effect. They stared at her like she'd spoken another language. She had just given them a ballistic solution that would take trained snipers minutes and computers to calculate. Where did you learn that? Mitchell asked slowly. Trembling hands stilled as she whispered, experience. The word carried a weight no one there could understand. And in that moment, Mitchell knew something the others didn't. She wasn't who she seemed. What kind of woman asks to do the impossible? The question hung in the silence of the range. 12 elite shooters, 1 lieutenant colonel, and a sergeant stared at the trembling-handed janitor who had just demanded a chance to touch legend. It was Harrison who broke first. He smirked, the kind of smirk soldiers wore when they thought they were invincible. Ma'am, I think you're confused. These aren't toys. These rifles kick like a professional boxer. They'll knock you flat. I understand, said softly. Jumped in, eager to explain, tone dripping with condescension. The alone weighs 32 pounds with optics. The recoil impulse is. I said I understand. Her voice cut sharper this time, not louder, but with a tone that silenced him. Tried next, leaning forward as if speaking to a child. Even if you could lift it, you don't have the training. These calculations, it takes years to learn. Windage, elevation, humidity. Wind deflection increases exponentially with distance, whispered, eyes on the far ridge. Temperature affects density. Barometric pressure shifts the trajectory. Humidity alters bullet stability. The Earth itself rotates beneath a round with 4 seconds of flight. The silence after was heavier than thunder. Even Mitchell, the old instructor, blinked slowly. Those are graduate-level calculations. You recited them in seconds. Her hands trembled again, and yet, somehow, the tremor only added to the mystery. She was broken, yes, but broken in a way that hinted at a deeper fracture, one forged in fire. Mitchell studied her. Where exactly did you acquire that knowledge? Her eyes flicked toward him. Just for a moment the ghost of a soldier flickered behind them. Experience. The word fell like a stone into water. Harrison laughed, the sound bouncing off concrete walls. All right then, if you're serious, let's make it interesting. Every soldier turned toward him. $500 says you can't even hit the target frame at 3,000 meters. Not the bullseye, not the silhouette, just the frame. It's the size of a postage stamp to the naked eye. The cruelty wasn't subtle. He wasn't betting against her skill. He was betting against her dignity. His head tilted. $500 that I can't hit the frame. Exactly. And when you miss, you admit this was foolish pride. Maybe then you'll stop reaching above your station. And if I hit it? Harrison's grin widened. Then I'll pay you the money and give you a public apology. Hell, I'll even listen to your little lecture about why you think the impossible is possible. The bet hung in the air, dripping with contempt. Mitchell's jaw tightened. He knew this was reckless, even cruel. Liability alone could ruin his career. But he also saw something in his eyes the others didn't, not bravado, not pride. A quiet kind of certainty. The certainty of someone who had once lived on the razor's edge of impossible. Ma'am, he said carefully, if you truly wish to attempt this, I'll arrange safety equipment. But understand, this isn't a game. It's dangerous. The physical demands. I accept, interrupted voice calm, but I have one condition. Harrison raised a brow. Condition. When I win, you don't just owe me $500 and an apology. You owe me your attention. When I tell you that your definition of impossible is too small, you will listen. For a moment the room was still. Then Harrison chuckled, loud and dismissive. Lady, if you hit that target, I'll listen to whatever fairy tale you want to spin. Then let's begin. The range exploded into motion. Safety officers scrambled. Protocols were recited. The M82A1, the king of rifles, was carried forward. 32 pounds of steel and recoil, chambered in .50 caliber BMG, a weapon designed not for sport but for war. They brought her safety glasses, hearing protection. She accepted them with trembling fingers, though when she adjusted the fit, her motions were precise, efficient, practiced. Muttered under his breath, "This is crazy, she'll hurt herself." Wilson whispered back, "Or humiliate herself." But Mitchell didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on her. Something in his gut whispered a truth he wasn't ready to voice. This woman was not who she seemed. Approached the weapon slowly, reverently, as if it were an old companion. And then something strange happened. The tremor in her hands diminished. Not gone, not cured, but the violent shaking that made her coffee spill and her mop rattle faded into something smaller, manageable. Her body aligned with the steel, and it was as if the rifle itself had absorbed the storm. Mitchell leaned towards Sergeant Davis. Sometimes, concentration and adrenaline override neurological damage. Muscle memory takes over. Davis frowned. You think she's actually done this before? Mitchell didn't answer. Lowered herself into the prone position. No fumbling, no hesitation, perfect form. Her elbows set just right. Her breathing slowed. Her finger rested near the trigger with the kind of familiarity that spoke not of theory, but of thousands of repetitions burned into the nervous system. Mitchell's throat tightened. Your positioning is excellent. Your husband must have been a remarkable instructor. She adjusted the bipod, eyes never leaving the ridge. He was. Harrison scoffed. Positioning doesn't matter. The target's barely visible at this range. Even if you could hold steady, you'll never calculate it right. What target will I be engaging? Asked quietly. Mitchell pointed. Standard silhouette. 40 inches tall, 20 wide, at 3,000 meters he exhaled, nearly invisible. 3,000 is fine. Shook his head. Ma'am, at that distance, even a perfect shot has almost 4 seconds of flight time. In 4 seconds, the wind changes. The earth rotates. Even the best snipers can't predict that. Slid her cheek against the stock, one eye closing. Her breathing slowed. Range 3,000 meters, she murmured. Wind 8 miles per hour northwest, gusting 12. Temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure 30.12. Humidity 58%. Elevation adjustment 47 minutes. Windage correction 2 right. Her words froze Mitchell's blood. Those weren't guesses. They weren't estimates. They were exact, precise. The kind of corrections only a sniper with years of experience and a mind trained to calculate in chaos could recite in seconds. Mitchell stepped forward, voice low. "Ma'am, where did you learn to do that?" Didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the target. Her hands were steady now, steady in a way that felt unnatural. "Experience," she whispered again. The intercom crackled. "All personnel clear the line. Shooter, you are cleared to fire when ready." The air thickened. Soldiers shifted uneasily. No one breathed. Through the glass, the valley stretched out. 3,000 meters away, a silhouette target waited, a ghost in the distance, nearly invisible to the naked eye. Inhaled, slow, controlled. Her heart rate dropped, each beat syncing with her breath. And then, so quiet it was almost a prayer, she spoke words no one expected to hear. "Overlord Actual, this is Ghost 7. Target acquired. Requesting permission to engage." Mitchell froze, his stomach dropped. Ghost 7. That call sign wasn't supposed to exist. It belonged to units buried beneath classification, missions erased from history. He had seen those reports, locked behind vault doors generals couldn't touch. His voice cracked, permission granted. The roared, a thunderclap, the kind of sound that split night from day. The bullet flew. 3.8 seconds of silence. And in that eternity, the impossible hung suspended in the air. 3.8 seconds. That's how long the round was in the air. But to every man watching, it felt like years. The sound of the still echoed off the valley walls when the silence came rushing in, a silence so thick it smothered every breath. The .50 caliber round carved through space, invisible, relentless. Wind tugged at it, gravity dragged at it, the earth itself rotated beneath it. Physics tried to break it apart, but the bullet carried something heavier than steel. It carried her redemption. Then the valley screamed. The electronic sensor registered the hit before human eyes could confirm it. A harsh tone split the silence. Impact. Mitchell's spotting scope was already on the target. His heart knew before his eyes did. His throat closed, emotion hitting him harder than the recoil. "Center mass," he whispered, voice cracking. "Direct hit, perfect kill shot." For a second, no one moved. 12 men who had mocked her. A staff sergeant who had bet against her dignity. A room that had dismissed her as nothing more than shaking hands. They stared at the impossible. That's not possible," Harrison stammered. His face went pale, anger and disbelief fighting for dominance. "The target isn't even visible at that distance." Fumbled with the scope, desperate to prove it was a mistake. "I can barely make out the frame, sir. There's no way." Mitchell said firmly, cutting them off. His voice carried not authority but awe. "I saw it with my own eyes. Center mass. Exactly where it needed to be." The silence dragged, broken only by the sound of working the rifle's action, safe and methodical, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. She spoke quietly, words falling like pebbles into still water. "I never said I had no military background." It was as if the air left the room. Her hands were trembling again. Now that the moment had passed, the storm returned. But the tremor seemed different somehow. Not weakness, but scars written into flesh. Mitchell stepped forward. His voice carried respect now, not doubt. "Ma'am, would you mind if I asked about your background, where you learned this?" Rose slowly from the rifle. Every movement deliberate, measured, as though she was unveiling something buried deep. Harrison still couldn't accept it. That kind of skill takes years, decades. Professional snipers train half their lives just to attempt half that distance. "Yes," said softly, "it does take years." Her eyes were far away, fixed on something no one else could see. Then, without another word, she rolled up her sleeve. The room leaned forward. What they saw froze them. Faded ink, an eagle in flight above crosshairs. The wings stretched wide, etched into skin not as decoration but as gravestone. Below, 2 words. Scout Sniper 17. His face drained of color. His lips parted but no sound came. "Scout Sniper 17, he whispered finally. That unit was disbanded. It was erased. It didn't exist." "It didn't exist," confirmed. Her voice was low but steady. "Officially, none of us lived. None of us died. None of us pulled the triggers that saved lives at distances the Pentagon would never admit were possible." His voice cracked. "How many kills?" His gaze drifted past them, across the glass, across the valley. She wasn't looking at them anymore. She was looking across souls, not meters. "I stopped counting after 100. The words landed like gunfire. Whispered again, almost to himself. "Jesus Christ." Harrison swallowed hard. His arrogance was ash now. "Ma'am, if you were 17, then your records." "Say what they were designed to say," Mitchell interrupted. His voice held a weight the younger soldiers couldn't carry. He understood. He finally understood. He straightened, his tone shifting. Not to a janitor, not even to a civilian, to a soldier. "Isn't that right, Staff Sergeant Sterling?" The effect was immediate. His posture changed. Her shoulders squared. The deference of a cleaning woman vanished. What stood before them was something else, a soldier answering to rank again. "Staff Sergeant Sterling," she said evenly. "Scout Sniper 17, at your service, sir." The words pulled the air from the room. Mitchell nodded slowly, eyes burning. "And your longest confirmed engagement, Staff Sergeant?" Didn't answer right away. Her eyes blurred, focusing on something far away. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Officially, 2,847 meters, Helmand Province, March 2020. She paused. Her trembling hands lifted slightly, as if remembering. "Unofficially, there are shots that never made the reports. Distances deemed too extraordinary. Operations erased. Buried." Wilson's voice broke. What happened to your hands?" Lifted them, the tremor obvious again, fingers quivering like leaves in an endless storm. "Final operation. IED took out our convoy, shrapnel severed nerves." She swallowed hard. "But that's not what broke me." Her eyes dimmed, her voice lowered to almost nothing. "It was holding my spotter while he bled out. Knowing my steady hands, the hands that never missed, couldn't save the one person who mattered most." The tremor wasn't weakness. It was grief given form. The young soldiers stared, shame bleeding into their faces. All the laughter, the mocking, the casual cruelty. They hadn't been mocking weakness. They'd been mocking scars. Harrison's voice cracked. We called you Shaky. We treated you like," his throat closed. "God, we treated you like garbage." His lips curved into something not quite a smile. "You treated a broken woman the way young soldiers often do, with cruelty you thought was harmless, but I was broken. I am broken." Her eyes burned into theirs, sharp as bullets. "The difference is this: broken doesn't mean useless." The words cut deeper than any shot. She let the silence sit, let the weight of it sink into their bones. Then she whispered, almost too soft to hear. "You want to know why I took your bet? Why I risked humiliation for $500? They waited, breathless. Because for 2 years I've watched you boys play soldier while I cleaned up after you. And tonight, I needed to remember who I used to be, just once, before the shaking wins completely." The room said nothing. There was nothing to say. His voice was the first to break the silence. "Ma'am, Scout Sniper 17 was legendary. The longest confirmed kills in history. How many operations?" "Classified," interrupted softly, "and it will remain that way." But Mitchell knew. He understood more than the others, and his respect was no longer curiosity, it was reverence. The room had witnessed more than an impossible shot. They had seen a ghost return from the ashes. What happens when a soldier can't let go of the war? The young men around her stared at the faded ink on her arm, but wasn't with them anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere louder, somewhere darker. Her voice dropped, softer now, more fragile than before. "You want to know what broke my hands? It wasn't the shrapnel, it was what came before it." The soldiers leaned in, barely breathing. They had asked. Now she was going to tell them. Her eyes drifted shut, and the walls of Fort dissolved. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 2020. The desert night was a furnace of silence, broken only by the distant cough of gunfire and the low hum of radios. Lay prone on a rocky ridge, her cheek against the stock of her rifle. Beside her, Sergeant Daniel Reeve, her spotter, her partner, her tether to sanity in a world that had long since stopped making sense. "Wind's shifting," Reeve murmured, his voice steady. "I see it," whispered, adjusting. Her breath was steady. Her heart rate synced to the scope. Through glass, the world shrank to a single target, a figure moving under moonlight nearly 3 kilometers away. A commander, high value. One order could end dozens of lives. Reeve's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. The touch wasn't distraction. It was anchor. They didn't need words anymore. Years together had built something stronger than language. "Range?" she asked. 2847, perfect conditions." Her lips twitched. Perfect didn't exist in war, but it was close enough. "Send it," Reeve said. The world went still. Breath in, hold, the trigger broke. The rifle bucked, thunder rolling across the valley. Time stretched. The bullet flew, and then impact. The target crumpled silently, distance swallowing the sound. Reeve let out the faintest laugh. 2847, that's one for the history books." "History doesn't keep our score," said. "No, but we do." They smiled just briefly, and then the night swallowed them again. Her voice broke as she whispered to the present. "He was the only one who could steady me. Not my hands, me." The room stayed silent. Her memory pulled further. Weeks later, same desert, different night. The convoy, 4 vehicles, dust clouds trailing like ghosts. Road second, Reeve beside her, map spread, eyes sharp. The mission was routine as war ever was. Then the light. The blast ripped reality apart. Sound vanished, replaced by a roar so deep it shook her bones. Heat, dust, fire. Shrapnel tore through metal, through flesh. The vehicle flipped, slammed down. Screams bled into chaos. When her vision cleared, she was on her back, ears ringing, hands shaking uncontrollably. And Reeve was there, slumped against twisted steel. His chest was torn open. "Stay with me," pleaded, pressing her hands to the wound. They shook violently, slick with blood. "Please just stay." His eyes locked on hers, calm, steady, always steady. He rasped, lips coated in red, "It's okay." "No, don't you dare. Not here, not like this." "You've got this," he whispered. His hand, weak, still found hers, still anchored her even as he slipped away. And then he was gone. Her scream never left her throat. It stayed buried, locked inside her trembling hands where it lived forever. Back in the range, his voice cracked. "The IED severed nerves, but that's not what broke me. What broke me was holding him. Knowing I could hit a man at nearly 3,000 meters but couldn't keep my spotter alive in my arms." Her hands shook openly now, visible grief trembling for all to see. Wiped his face, guilt carving into his features. He whispered, we mocked that. We called you Shaky. We laughed at it. Yes, said quietly. And it's all right, because you didn't know, you couldn't know, you saw weakness. You didn't see what it cost. Harrison swallowed hard. His arrogance was gone. His voice was a whisper. Staff Sergeant, we treated you like trash. And all this time. All this time, interrupted softly, I was just trying to survive like the rest of you. But survival takes different forms. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's a mop in your hands instead of a rifle. The silence pressed heavy against them all. The young men shifted, ashamed, small in their uniforms. Mitchell cleared his throat, voice low, almost reverent. Staff Sergeant, why here? Why Fort? Why this life after everything you were? Hesitated, eyes drifting toward the dark valley outside. Because broken soldiers don't vanish. We hide. The VA gave me custodial work so I could stay close. It kept me connected, but there's another reason. Her gaze sharpened, cutting across them like a blade. Sometimes we're placed where eyes are needed, watching, listening. Even broken, a sniper sees what others don't. The realization dawned on them. For 2 years, while they mocked her, she'd been observing everything. Conversations, training routines, security flaws. She had been recording it all not as a janitor but as an asset. You've been watching us, said, voice trembling. I've been watching everything, confirmed. That's what I was trained to do. For the first time that night, the young soldiers weren't ashamed. They were afraid. Not of her, but of how blind they had been. The story should have ended there, with a single impossible shot, a reveal, a tattoo, and a confession, but wasn't done. Her voice softened again, tinged with something heavier than sorrow. You know what I learned, she whispered. Legends don't live in medals, they don't live in records, they live in the shadows, and sometimes in the hands of the broken. Her words fell like scripture, heavy and unshakable. The men around her didn't move, didn't breathe. They were no longer mocking, no longer doubting. They were listening, as if listening to something they might carry for the rest of their lives. How do you look someone in the eye after you've mocked their scars? The young soldiers didn't know where to put their hands, their eyes, their shame. Harrison stood stiff, jaw clenched, his arrogance burned down to ash. Mouth opened, then shut, like he wanted to say something but knew nothing would be enough. Stared at the floor, his throat bobbing, guilt heavy in his chest. It was Harrison who finally moved. He stepped forward, slower than he ever had in his life. His hands trembled not with fear but with humiliation. He pulled out the folded cash, $500, and held it toward her. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant, his voice cracked. This doesn't feel right, taking your money after what I. Raised a hand, silencing him. Her eyes softened but her voice carried steel. Keep it. The words stunned them. But, understand something, Staff Sergeant. That shot wasn't about money. It was never about proving anything to you. It was about proving something to myself. That for just one night I could be who I used to be. That my hands, broken as they are, could still remember. Her gaze swept the room. None of them could hold it for long. It was like standing in judgment, not by law or rank, but by truth itself. You will see me tomorrow, she continued. With a mop, with trembling hands. You'll remember the janitor you laughed at. And maybe, in the back of your minds, you'll also remember Ghost 7. And maybe you'll think twice before deciding who deserves your respect. No one breathed. And then she picked up her cleaning supplies. Just like that. The woman who had shattered the definition of impossible, who had carried ghosts heavier than any of them could imagine, slung a janitor's bag over her shoulder. The range doors closed behind her with the weight of a gravestone. The soldiers stood there, hollowed out. Whispered, what the hell just happened? No one answered. Mitchell finally exhaled, his voice steady, but his eyes glassy with something almost like grief. What happened? is that you just witnessed something very few men ever do. You looked into the eyes of someone history tried to erase, and she reminded you that legends don't die. Harrison pressed his palms against the table, his shoulders sinking. We called her Shaky. Jesus Christ, we called her Shaky. Mitchell's gaze sharpened. And what did she call herself? Silence. She called herself broken, Mitchell continued softly. But she showed you something. Broken doesn't mean useless. Broken doesn't mean weak. Sometimes the most dangerous ones are the ones you dismiss, the ones you overlook. The men shifted, unease cutting through their shame. Do you know why she took that shot? Mitchell asked, though it wasn't a question. Because she needed to remember. Not for you, not even for me, for herself. Because when war takes everything from you, sometimes the only thing left is a reminder that you were more than what you became. Swallowed hard. She's been here the whole time, just cleaning floors. Mitchell nodded. And watching, don't think for a second she's only been mopping. For 2 years she's been observing, assessing, reporting. You thought she was invisible, but she's seen everything. The weight of that realization landed on them like a hammer. They had been careless. They had joked, bragged, complained in front of her, and she had seen it all. Wilson's voice was small. So she's still serving, just not in the way we think. Mitchell's eyes softened. Exactly. For a long time, no one spoke. The shot, that impossible, perfect shot, still hung in the air like thunder refusing to fade. Hours later, walked alone down the dim corridor of the administrative building. Her hands trembled again, the storm returning, her body exhausted from the concentration it had demanded. But she carried herself with a strange peace. She had done it, just once she had remembered. Her reflection caught in the window the silhouette of a janitor with shaking hands, but she saw something else behind the glass. A sniper, a soldier, a ghost. Her whisper was soft, almost prayer. You'd have laughed at them, Reeve, you'd have loved it. And then she kept walking. The next morning the range was different. Not louder, not busier, but heavier. The men gathered early, rifles across their laps, but none of them joked. None of them mocked. Their voices carried weight now, as if the ground itself demanded respect. When passed down the hallway with her cart, the laughter didn't come. No comments about sippy cups, no cruel nicknames. They stepped aside. She didn't look at them, didn't need to. But the silence was louder than their insults had ever been. Mitchell watched it all unfold. He saw the shift, young soldiers carrying shame, carrying humility. He knew they would never forget that night, not because of the shot, but because of the woman who made it. Later, as he stood by the window overlooking the valley, Mitchell let the weight of it settle on him. He whispered to himself, sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones no one sees. And in that truth, he felt something both heavy and freeing. Because Sterling had given him a gift too, a reminder that legends don't always march in parades. Sometimes they mop the floors. Sometimes they shake. Sometimes they carry ghosts in trembling hands. And sometimes, when the world least expects it, they remind us who they are. That night the soldiers gathered in the mess hall. Conversations were muted. Harrison sat apart, his untouched tray in front of him, guilt carved deep into his face. Finally broke the silence. We bet against her dignity, and she destroyed us with one shot. Harrison's voice was hollow. She didn't destroy us. She saved us. She reminded us what respect is supposed to mean. Nodded slowly. She carried more weight in silence than we ever did with all our shouting. They sat with that truth. And though no one said it aloud, each of them knew that the night before had changed them, not just as soldiers, as men. Back in her quarters sat alone. The tremor in her hands was worse now, exhaustion amplifying it. She closed her eyes, leaning back, whispering into the empty room. Still with me, Reeve, did you see it? No answer came, only silence. But in that silence she imagined him smiling, imagined his steady hand on her shoulder once more. For the first time in years, she let herself weep, not from weakness, from release. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And Sterling had acted. One shot, one night, one reminder that legends don't always vanish. Sometimes they just wait for the right moment to return. What does it mean to live with ghosts you created yourself? Had asked herself that question for years, not out loud, never in front of anyone, but alone in the quiet of barracks rooms or the empty corners of bases where silence pressed too tightly. She'd ask, how many faces had she erased? How many children grew without fathers because of the squeeze of her finger? The rifle had been her world once. She had loved it, the way it forced everything into focus, the way it silenced the chaos of war into a single breath, a single heartbeat, a single target. Snipers talked about clarity, about the peace in the moment before the shot. And yes, there was peace there, but no one told you what came after. No one told you about the echo. Her first kill had been in Kandahar, years before Helmand. She was 26, steady-handed, already earning a reputation among her peers. The shot was only 800 meters, routine by her later standards. The man carried an AK, moving toward a patrol route. She watched him through her scope, saw the way his head turned, saw the beads of sweat on his skin, the uneven rise and fall of his chest. He was just a man. She pulled the trigger anyway. The round hit, he dropped. The radio confirmed the kill. Her spotter clapped her shoulder. Good shot, Sterling. But that night when she closed her eyes, she didn't hear praise. She heard the echo, the sharp report of the rifle ringing endlessly in her chest. And in her dreams, the man didn't fall. He turned. He looked at her. As the years went on, the shots got longer, harder, more impossible, and yet she made them. One by one, the numbers climbed, double digits, then triple, records broken though never acknowledged. Her spotter, Reeve, used to keep count. She'd scold him for it. Don't carry the numbers, it'll kill you. He'd grin, unbothered. Somebody has to remember what you've done. But she remembered, every face, every silhouette, some clear as photographs, some nothing but smudges in her memory, blurred by distance. Sometimes she wished she could forget them. Sometimes she prayed she wouldn't, because forgetting felt like betrayal, remembering felt like punishment. That was the paradox of the trigger. Years later, after Helmand, after the record shot that would never be in any book, she sat in a debriefing room. The walls were bare. The officer across from her wore pity in his eyes. You've served with distinction, Staff Sergeant Sterling, but your medical evaluation is clear. Neurological damage, severe tremors. You're no longer fit for active duty. She stared at her hands. They shook even as she clenched them into fists. And what do I do now? The officer shifted uncomfortably. The VA will help. There are programs, transitional work. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of, she repeated bitterly, as if she were a child, as if her entire life could be replaced with a check and a mop. But she didn't argue, she saluted, she walked out, and just like that she ceased to exist. At Fort, years later, no one saw her as anything more than broken, and in a way that invisibility was a gift, because the truth, she was broken. The tremors weren't just nerves, they were grief carved into flesh. Her body carried what her soul couldn't. Every shake, every spill, every mocking laugh, it was Reeve's absence, living in her skin. But at night, when she lay in her small quarters, the ghosts returned. She'd see the man in Kandahar, the commander in Helmand, dozens of faces she'd erased with impossible precision. And Reeve, always Reeve. His voice, his last words, "You've got this." There was another mission she never told anyone about, not even Mitchell that night at the range. A winter operation, mountains near the border. She'd been ordered to take a shot across a valley, 2,000 meters. The man wore robes, carried no weapon. Intelligence insisted he was a courier. A message in his satchel could direct an ambush on American forces. Her orders were clear: neutralize the target. Through her scope she saw his face. He was young, too young, 17, 18. His eyes darted nervously, his hands fidgeted with the strap of the satchel. He looked like a boy carrying books to school. Range 2025, Reeves said softly. Wind steady, you're clear. Her finger rested on the trigger, but it didn't pull. Sterling. Her throat closed. She saw not an enemy, but a boy. Maybe her son's age if she'd ever had children. Reeves' voice hardened. Sterling, orders. She exhaled, steadying. Her finger squeezed. The boy dropped. Later, the satchel was recovered. Inside was a folded map scrawled with coordinates. Reeve had clapped her on the back. You saved lives today. But had stared at her hands, and that night the tremor started. Not from injury, from guilt. Back in the present, she sat in her quarters at Fort, the room dim, her mop leaning against the wall. She stared at her hands, shaking in the glow of a single lamp. The impossible shot at 3,000 meters had proven something, that her skill still lived inside her. But it hadn't erased the ghosts. It never could. She whispered into the silence, I can still hit the target, but I can't hit peace. Her voice cracked. Because that was the truth no one wanted to admit. Snipers didn't just kill enemies. They carried them. Every shot was stored, locked in memory, replayed in silence for the rest of their lives. And for Sterling, silence was all she had left. Meanwhile, in the barracks, the young soldiers lay awake. None of them could sleep, not after seeing her, not after hearing her voice. Whispered in the dark, she's haunted. Harrison's voice, unusually quiet, replied, so are we now. Because once you saw a ghost, you couldn't unsee it. And Sterling had become their ghost. What happens to young soldiers when they meet someone who shatters everything they thought they knew? At Fort, the rhythm of training didn't change. Wake-up calls, drills, marksmanship exercises, marching boots on asphalt. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The mocking laughter was gone. When pushed her cart through the hallways, there were no more jeers, no cruel nicknames. The air grew heavy instead, heavy with shame, with respect, with something closer to reverence. She didn't ask for it, she didn't want it. She kept her head down, mopping floors, collecting trash, emptying bins. Her hands still trembled, the mop handle rattling faintly. To anyone walking by, she looked the same. But to those 12 men, she was no longer Shaky. She was Ghost 7. Mitchell saw the change first. He watched it in the small ways. Harrison no longer strutted when he entered the range. He carried himself with restraint, speaking less, listening more. Stayed after drills, practicing wind calls longer than before, his eyes narrower, more disciplined. Stopped bragging altogether. It was as if had become an invisible instructor. She never stood on the line, she never corrected them. She didn't need to. The memory of her did the teaching. At night the soldiers whispered, not about bars or women or paychecks, but about her. How long do you think she served? Did you see how steady she was when she touched that rifle, like the tremor just disappeared? She's watching us, even now. And in a way, she was. Carried her mop like a rifle, scanning rooms with the same vigilance she'd once used in war. She knew habits, weaknesses, blind spots. She knew who cut corners and who stayed sharp. She never reported it, not directly. But Mitchell could see her influence in the way the men trained. They didn't want to disappoint her. One afternoon, the men were practicing advanced wind calls. Struggled with his corrections, his shots drifting wide. He cursed under his breath, slamming his hand against the rifle stock. From the back of the observation room, a voice spoke, soft, calm. You're rushing your breathing. Froze, slowly he turned. Stood there, leaning lightly against her cart, a rag in one hand. Her voice hadn't carried authority, but it had carried truth. Nodded stiffly, embarrassed. He returned to his rifle, slowed his breath, counted heartbeats. The next shot struck clean. When he looked back, she was gone. Moments like that became common. Quiet interventions, barely audible corrections, never lectures, never commands, just whispers that landed like scripture. Don't chase the shot, let it come to you. Your stance is too rigid, relax into it. Respect the wind, it doesn't care what you believe. Each time, she vanished before they could thank her. And each time they listened. Mitchell approached her one evening. She was scrubbing the floor in the admin building, her knees bent, her hands shaking. "You know," he said, voice low, "you're training them." Her head didn't lift. "No, I'm cleaning floors." "I've been in this long enough to know the difference," Mitchell replied. "They're different men because of you." Paused, her rag dripping into the bucket. "They'll forget. Give it time. Young men always do." "Maybe," Mitchell admitted, "but maybe not. Sometimes one night is enough to mark a man forever." Her lips curved faintly, though not into a smile, more into something like sorrow. "And sometimes, Colonel, one night marks you in ways you never escape." Mitchell didn't push. He knew her ghosts weren't his to carry. Weeks passed. The men grew sharper, more disciplined. Their arrogance dulled into something closer to humility. They still joked, still laughed, but it was different. There was weight in them now, as though they understood that soldiering wasn't about proving how loud you could be. It was about how much silence you could endure. And silence was the heaviest of all. One evening, Harrison lingered after drills. He stayed on the range long after the others left, his shots scattering at 2,600 meters. Frustration burned across his face. Appeared behind him, unseen until her voice broke the air. "You're fighting the rifle." Harrison flinched. He turned, shame flooding his eyes. "Staff Sergeant." "Don't fight it," she continued. "Let it breathe. You're trying to dominate physics. You can't. Respect it. Work with it." He nodded slowly. He adjusted. His next round landed true. When he lowered his rifle, she was already walking away. "Wait," he called. She stopped. "I'm sorry," his voice cracked, "for everything." His back remained turned. "Don't apologize to me, Harrison. Prove it in how you carry yourself. Respect isn't spoken, it's shown." Then she kept walking. Mitchell noticed it too. The men weren't just better shooters. They were better soldiers, less reckless, more thoughtful. They trained with purpose, not pride. And though never wore a uniform again, she had become their ghost instructor, their silent standard. In the mess hall, the whispers continued. "Do you think she regrets it, the kills?" "Every one of them." "But she still made them." "Because she had to." Those conversations lingered longer than laughter. And in them, the young soldiers found something deeper than bravado. They found humility. One night sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. The image of steadying her trembling hands over the haunted him. He whispered into the dark, "She carried it all for us, and we mocked her." Harrison's voice answered from the bunk below, "Not anymore." For the first time, the barracks fell into silence, not born of exhaustion, but of reflection. Alone in her quarters, knew none of this. She didn't know how the men whispered her name like legend, how they trained harder under her unseen shadow, how her presence had reshaped them. To her, she was still just a janitor with shaking hands, clinging to fragments of who she once was. But to them, she had become something they could never unsee. The woman who had proven the impossible. The soldier who carried ghosts in her tremor. The reminder that legends don't always die. Sometimes they mop the floors. What becomes of a legend when the world refuses to remember her? At Fort, life resumed. Drills, briefings, ranges alive with thunder. To the unknowing eye, nothing had changed. But for 12 young soldiers, the world had been rewritten. They still trained, but not with arrogance. They carried silence now. The kind of silence had given them a silence heavier than orders, heavier than rank. She never stood on the line with them again. She never touched the after that night. She returned to her mop, her cart, her trembling hands. And yet every time they stepped to the firing line, they heard her voice. Respect the wind. Breathe with the earth. Don't chase the shot. It wasn't instruction. It was memory, her ghost guiding them in silence. Mitchell saw it too. He watched Harrison carry himself differently, less as a braggart and more as a soldier who finally understood humility. He watched corrections sharpen with patience. He watched arrogance dissolve into something resembling reverence. The transformation wasn't because of drills or lectures. It was because of one woman who refused to announce herself. Mitchell thought of that night often, the thunderclap, the impossible shot, the way the word impossible had died forever in that valley. And he thought of her hands, trembling in daily life, but steady when it mattered most. He knew what the others didn't. He knew her placement at Fort wasn't random. Broken snipers didn't just vanish into mop buckets. Sometimes they were put where they could still serve, quietly, invisibly, watching, listening, protecting. Sterling hadn't retired, she had simply shifted, from battlefield to shadow, from uniform to ghost. One evening, weeks after the impossible shot, Mitchell found her sitting alone outside the admin building. The sun was setting, orange light spilling across the valley. Her mop leaned against the wall. Her hands shook in her lap. He sat beside her, silent for a while. The two of them watched the horizon fade into darkness. "You changed them," he said finally. Her lips curved faintly. "No, they changed themselves. I just reminded them of something they'd forgotten." "And what was that?" "That respect isn't given by rank. It's earned by silence." Her voice cracked, softer now, "and that broken doesn't mean finished." Mitchell studied her trembling hands, the way she tried to still them against her knees. He wanted to ask if she regretted it, the kills, the years, the ghosts, but he knew the answer was more complicated than yes or no. Instead, he asked, "Do you ever miss it?" She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Every day and never at all." He nodded. He understood. The next morning was back at work, pushing her cart through the halls. The young soldiers stepped aside for her now, silent, respectful. Some saluted when they thought no one was watching. She never acknowledged it. But inside she felt the shift. They no longer saw a janitor. They saw something more. She didn't need their recognition. She didn't need their words. The shot had spoken for her. Months passed. New recruits arrived. Old ones rotated out. But the story remained. Whispers spread quietly through the base. A janitor with shaking hands. A woman no one respected. Until one night she picked up a rifle and rewrote reality at 3,000 meters. The details blurred, as stories always do. Some said it was luck. Some swore it was staged. But the 12 who had been there never doubted. They carried it with them into every deployment, every mission, every quiet moment where respect mattered more than bravado. And she remained unseen, walking the halls, cleaning the floors, her mop squeaking across tile. A ghost in plain sight. One night, Mitchell returned to the range alone. He stood behind the glass, staring at the distant silhouette 3,000 meters away. The target still bore faint marks from her shot, scars in steel that no storm could erase. He whispered into the empty air. "Sometimes, legends don't stand on podiums. Sometimes they mop the floor beside you. And sometimes, when the world least expects it, they remind you that impossible is only a word." The valley swallowed his words, but he knew she didn't need to hear them. She already knew. In her quarters sat quietly, hands trembling as she poured water into a chipped mug. She lifted it carefully, managing the shake with practiced patience. Her reflection caught in the darkened glass. A janitor, a soldier, a sniper, a ghost. She whispered to it, to herself, to the memory of Reeve who never left her side. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And then she drank steady enough. Because legends don't always wear medals. Sometimes they wear scars. Sometimes they hide in silence. And sometimes, with one impossible shot, they remind the world that broken doesn't mean gone. Staff Sergeant Sterling, Ghost 7, remained invisible at Fort. But every soldier who walked those halls knew the truth. Some heroes live in shadows, and some legends refuse to stay buried.